In 1974, Ronald O'Brien lived with his wife, Daneen, in Deer Park, Texas, with their son Timothy and daughter Elizabeth. Ronald worked as an optician at Texas State Optical in Sharpstown, Houston, and he was also a deacon at the Second Baptist Church, where he sang in the choir and operated a local bus program. It was October 31st of 1974, Halloween night, and Ronald took his children trick-or-treating in a neighborhood in Pasadena, Texas. Ronald's neighbor accompanied them, along with his 2 children. The kids were excited and having a great time, stocking up on their precious candy. At one point, the group visited a home where the occupants failed to answer the door, so the children became impatient and ran ahead, while Ronald stayed behind. He eventually caught up with the group and pulled out 5 pixie sticks. At the end of the night, he handed 1 pixie stick each to Timothy and Elizabeth, as well as 1 each to the neighbor's children. After returning home, he gave the last pixie stick to a child he recognized from church. Before bed, Timothy asked to eat some of his candy, and according to Ronald, his son chose the pixie stick. Timothy struggled to get the powder out of the straw, so his father helped him to loosen it. Timothy complained that the powder tasted bitter, not at all like normal pixie sticks. Ronald gave his son a glass of Kool-Aid to wash out the taste. Almost immediately, Timothy started complaining that his stomach was in pain, so he ran to the bathroom, where he began puking and convulsing. According to Ronald, he went to the bathroom with Timothy and held the boy as he vomited, and Timothy eventually went limp in his arms. Ronald called the authorities and his son was rushed to the hospital, but Timothy passed away in the ambulance. His time of death was less than an hour after eating the pixie stick. The community of Deer Park was shocked and horrified by Timothy's death. Understandably so, parents started turning in their children's Halloween candy to the authorities, terrified that it might be poisoned. The police, for their part, were determined to catch the person responsible for Timothy's murder, and the finger soon pointed at Ronald himself. The autopsy revealed that the pixie stick Timothy had eaten was laced with a fatal dose of potassium cyanide, and law enforcement quickly confiscated the other pixie sticks that Ronald had handed out. Luckily, none of the other children had consumed the pixie sticks. However, the parents of the boy who had received the final pixie stick were in for a horrible scare. They could not find the poison candy at first, and they rushed upstairs to their son's bedroom, where they found him asleep with the unopened pixie stick in hand. As it turned out, the boy had been unable to remove the staple that held the packaging together. Investigators determined that the pixie sticks had been opened, filled with potassium cyanide, and then resealed with staples. Furthermore, according to pathologists, the pixie stick that had killed Timothy contained enough potassium cyanide to kill 2 fully grown adults, while the other pixie sticks contained even more than the first. The police started to question Ronald, suspicious that he might have been responsible. Ronald initially told them that he did not remember which house he had received the pixie sticks from, but this seemed extremely suspicious to investigators. On Halloween night, the weather had been rainy, so Ronald and his neighbor had only taken the children to a few houses on 2 different streets. There was no reason why Ronald should have forgotten the house. When the police went door to door questioning all the homeowners in the neighborhood, they learned that none of the houses had given out pixie sticks, which only increased their suspicion. The police took Ronald out for a walk around the neighborhood, and he eventually led them to the house where nobody had answered the door. Ronald claimed that he had gone back to this house and the homeowner had cracked open the door, handing him 5 pixie sticks. He said that he had only seen the man's arm, which he described as hairy. The investigators began looking into this house, and they discovered that the owner was a man named Courtney Melvin. Melvin was an air traffic controller at William P. Hobby Airport, and on Halloween night he had returned home from work at 11 p.m., hours after trick-or-treating was over. The police questioned Melvin's co-workers, and more than 200 people confirmed his alibi. Melvin was innocent. With this new information in mind, investigators focused on Ronald. They discovered that Ronald was about $100,000 in debt and had a history of being unable to keep a job. In fact, for the decade preceding his son's death, Ronald held a total of 21 different jobs. In addition, he was also suspected of a robbery at Texas State Optical, and his boss was on the verge of terminating his employment. Ronald's car was about to be repossessed, and he had defaulted on several bank loans, and the family home had recently been foreclosed on. The police soon discovered that, in January of 1974, just a few months before Timothy's death, Ronald had taken out 2 life insurance policies of $10,000, one on each of his children. The month before Timothy's death, he had taken out 2 additional $20,000 policies, again on his children. The life insurance company had attempted to convince him otherwise, but Ronald had gone through with the policies regardless. Finally, in the days immediately before Timothy's death, he had taken out yet another $20,000 policy on each child. Ronald's wife claimed that she did not know about these policies, and the police soon discovered that Ronald had called his insurance company the morning after his son's death to inquire about the payout. In October of 1974, Ronald had visited a chemical supply store in Houston where he asked the employee about cyanide. The employee told him that the minimum amount of cyanide available for purchase was 5 pounds. Ronald left the store without buying anything. After finding out about this, the police began to suspect that Ronald had been the culprit responsible for the death of his own son. They believed that his motivation was the life insurance payout he hoped to receive, and he had given laced pixie sticks to the other children in an effort to cover up the crime. However, despite this theory, the police were having difficulty locating where and when Ronald had actually purchased the cyanide. Regardless, he was arrested on November 5th of 1974. Throughout questioning, Ronald maintained his innocence. He was indicted on 1 count of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder, and he entered a plea of not guilty to all charges. The trial began in Houston on May 5th of 1975. A chemist who was acquainted with Ronald testified, saying that in the summer of 1973, Ronald contacted him asking about cyanide and how much he would need for a fatal dose. Ronald's sister-in-law and brother-in-law also testified, saying that on the day of Timothy's funeral, Ronald talked about using the money from the insurance policies to go on a long vacation and buy various items for himself. Ronald's wife took the stand and told the court that Ronald forced Timothy to eat the pixie stick on Halloween night, which contradicted Ronald's account that Timothy chose the pixie stick himself. Multiple friends and co-workers of Ronald testified against him, confirming that in the months leading up to Timothy's murder, Ronald showed an unusual interest in cyanide and constantly spoke about the dosage required to kill a person. Ronald insisted that he was innocent, and his defense revolved around the urban legend that some unknown person was poisoning candy on Halloween and handing out candy apples with razor blades. Over the course of the legal proceedings, Ronald acquired the nickname the Candyman amongst the media. On June 3rd of 1975, the jury deliberated for 46 minutes, and Ronald was found guilty on all charges. They took an additional 71 minutes to sentence him to death by lethal injection. Shortly after this, Ronald's wife filed for divorce, and she later remarried. Her new husband adopted Elizabeth. According to a former chaplain named Carol Pickett, who worked for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, Ronald was absolutely hated by his fellow inmates, who shunned him for the murder of his own child. He had no friends in prison. The inmates petitioned to hold a demonstration on the day of Ronald's execution to express their hatred of him. Ronald's first execution date was August 8th of 1980, but his attorney successfully petitioned for a stay of execution. The second date was scheduled for May 25th of 1982, but that date was also postponed. The third execution date was scheduled for October 31st of 1982, the 8th anniversary of the murder, but the Supreme Court delayed the execution to allow Ronald to appeal his conviction. The fourth date was scheduled for March 31st of 1984, and Ronald's attorney attempted to secure another stay of execution on the grounds that death by lethal injection was a cruel and unusual punishment, but on March 28th, a federal judge rejected this request. On March 31st of 1984, shortly after midnight, Ronald O'Brien was executed via lethal injection at the Huntsville unit. During the execution, a crowd of 300 people gathered outside, cheering and yelling "Trick or treat." Anti-death penalty demonstrators were showered with Halloween candy. Ronald's last words were as follows: "What is about to transpire in a few moments is wrong. However, we as human beings do make mistakes and errors. This execution is one of those wrongs, yet doesn't mean our whole system of justice is wrong. Therefore, I forgive all who have taken part in any way in my death. Also, to anyone I have offended in any way during my 39 years, I pray and ask your forgiveness, just as I forgive anyone who offended me in any way. And I pray and ask God's forgiveness for all of us respectively as human beings. To my loved ones, I extend my undying love. To those close to me, know in your hearts that I love you one and all. God bless you all, and may God's best blessings be always yours. Ronald C. O'Brien. P.S. During my time here, I have been treated well by all TDC personnel." It was a normal Halloween night in 2010 when 16-year-old Devin Griffin returned to his mother and stepfather's house in Oak Harbor, Ohio. He had spent the previous night at his father's house. When Devin entered the house, he found the dead bodies of his mother and stepfather, Susan and William Liske, in their bedroom. At first, he assumed that the horrific crime scene was a prank. After all, Halloween is notorious for pranks and practical jokes, so Devin thought that his family had played a morbid joke on him. However, he soon came to realize that this was no prank. Susan and William were truly dead. Devin called the police, who rushed to the house and began investigating. His older brother, 23-year-old Derek, was also found dead in his upstairs bedroom with a blunt force trauma wound to the head. The Ottawa County prosecutor, Mark Mulligan, stated, "This was the most disturbing murder scene I'd seen over the course of my career. I can still see it to this day." Investigators began piecing together the events leading up to the triple Halloween homicide. William had a biological son in addition to his wife's biological children, and his son was named William too, although he went by the nickname BJ. BJ and his father had spent the day before Halloween hunting, and that night they had a party with a neighbor that ended at around midnight. On Halloween morning, Susan's sister-in-law, Lori, became concerned when Derek failed to show up at her house to do some work with her husband. She called Susan and Derek's phones, but nobody responded. She then reached out to Devin, but he didn't know anything because he had spent the night at his father's house and then went to a church concert the next morning. When Devin eventually made it home, he played some video games before he actually discovered the bodies, and he contacted his Aunt Lori before calling the police. It was easy for the authorities to determine cause of death for each victim. As previously mentioned, Derek had been bludgeoned to death, but according to officials, it looked like Bill had been shot 4 or 5 times. Sue was shot 3 times with a defensive wound to her hand. There was blood splatter all over the walls. Physical evidence also suggested that Susan had suffered SA before her death. On the basis of this grisly information, the investigators formulated a hypothesis. They believed that the killer started with Derek, using a hammer to keep his actions quiet so he wouldn't wake Susan and William, before switching to a firearm for the sleeping couple. There were no shell casings found at the crime scene, which indicated that the killer had been careful enough to remove what evidence he could. There were also no signs of forced entry or a robbery. A neighbor reported that she heard banging noises at around 6:30 p.m. on Halloween night, which may have been gunshots. Investigators searched the rest of the property for more evidence. On a dock near a pond on the property, they found a muddy footprint, and the police believed that the killer may have walked across the dock and thrown the murder weapons into the pond. The authorities drained the pond, but they did not find any weapons. The police started questioning Devin, who said that he came home from his father's house, ran inside to get his choir gear, and then ran back out of the house to go to the church concert. He only discovered the murders when he returned home later that day. The authorities confirmed his alibi and cleared him as a suspect. However, during his interview, Devin said something that caught the attention of investigators. When he came home to retrieve his choir gear before the concert, BJ was in the driveway, loading something into William's truck. The police turned their attention to finding BJ, who had been mysteriously absent during the investigation. As it turned out, BJ's relationship with Susan was extremely tense. Witnesses told the police that BJ had been hostile towards Susan ever since she married his father, and their arguments had eventually become physical. According to detectives, BJ and Susan had had some altercations. She was accosted by him on several occasions. They did not get along whatsoever. Those who knew him described BJ as a troubled young man who was dealing with obvious mental illness. He had a history of violence, and alcohol consumption was known to exacerbate his negative behaviors. Things had gotten so bad that BJ was no longer allowed to live at his father's house, which only increased his resentment of Susan. The police tracked him down to a family hunting cabin in Carroll County, and they searched the property for weapons. Deputy Mike Balash stated, "We know we're looking for at least one blunt force object. We believed at that time it was a hammer, and then we're looking for a small caliber gun." William's truck was at the hunting cabin, and the police found traces of blood and a .22 caliber rifle inside the vehicle. In addition, investigators back at the Liske family home discovered a bloody hammer in a closet. BJ was arrested and charged with murder. His clothing was confiscated by the authorities, and forensic analysis determined that the clothing contained DNA from all 3 victims. BJ used his phone call in jail to contact his mother, and she asked him how he could commit such a horrific crime. He responded, "I wasn't in my right mind. Mom, I can't talk about this anymore." In court, BJ said that he could not explain his actions on that fateful day. I loved my dad very much, and it makes me feel sick every time I think about what I did. I can't really explain why this all had to happen, but I think most of all it had to do with my mental illness. BJ pled guilty to 3 counts of aggravated murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The prosecutor, Mark Mulligan, said that there was plenty of evidence to pursue the death penalty, but because of BJ's history of mental illness, not to mention his young age, that would only result in years of appeal trials, so they declined to pursue the death penalty. On March 29th of 2015, 29-year-old BJ was found dead in his prison cell at Ross Correctional Institution in Chillicothe. His cause of death was a self-inflicted wound. "24-year-old Rebekah Gay was a beloved single mother with a 3-year-old son named Conway. She worked at a local store in her hometown of Mount Pleasant, Michigan. In October of 2012, Rebekah decorated her home with scarecrows and made plans to take her son trick-or-treating with her boyfriend, Aaron. However, on Halloween Day, Rebekah failed to show up for work, and a concerned co-worker went to her trailer to check on her. Rebekah wasn't home, but her car was located in the parking lot of a nearby bar. Her landlord unlocked the door of the trailer to let Rebekah's co-worker take a look inside, and they found her purse on the counter, but Rebekah herself was nowhere to be seen. The police conducted a search effort of her residence and vehicle, and they noticed that a specific area of the carpet inside the trailer looked as if it had been recently cleaned. Rebekah's home was determined to be a crime scene, and the authorities began canvassing the neighborhood. Detectives interviewed people who knew Rebekah, including Aaron and Conway's father, and both men were cleared as suspects. Another man whom the police questioned was 55-year-old John Douglas White, a minister who was in a relationship with Rebekah's mother, Sally. John lived in the same trailer park as Rebekah, and he often dropped Conway off at his father's house. According to John, the morning of Rebekah's disappearance was normal. He went to Rebekah's trailer at 6:30 a.m. to watch Conway before taking him to his father's house. The door of the trailer was unlocked, so he let himself inside, and he said that Rebekah was in the bathroom and he heard her tell him to rest on the couch until Conway woke up. John fell asleep on the couch and did not see Rebekah leave, and John proceeded to drop Conway off at his father's house after he woke up. During the interview, detectives noticed that John had a cut on his nose, which they asked him about. John said that a shelf had fallen in his trailer and hit him in the face, and he even showed the fallen shelf to investigators, which made them think that he was telling the truth. However, detectives still needed to look into John's background, and they found some concerning details. According to some people, he was a good preacher, but many others said that he was strange. John had also been accused of attempted murder in the past. John served 2 years, and his congregation gave him a second chance. Things only got worse when the police searched John's truck and found traces of blood and a broken necklace. Detectives obtained a search warrant for John's trailer, where they found a bag with a rubber mallet, zip ties, construction garbage bags, and women's underwear. John also reluctantly agreed to take a polygraph exam, which he subsequently failed. At around 3 a.m. on November 1st, investigators showed John images of his blood-stained truck and the broken necklace, but John claimed that he knew nothing about it. Investigators dug deeper into John's past, specifically focusing on the attempted murder case that he was involved in. In Battle Creek, Michigan, in 1980, 22-year-old John had lured his 17-year-old neighbor, Teresa Etherton, into his basement, where he stabbed her numerous times. Teresa survived, and John served 2 years in prison before his release on appeal. John said that his lawyer should have mounted a defense on the grounds of insanity. However, the attempted murder wasn't the end of John's unsettling past. In 1994, he was implicated in the disappearance of a young woman named Vicky Sue Wall. Vicky's dead body was eventually found, but there wasn't much evidence to go on, so John pled no contest to involuntary manslaughter, and he went to prison from 1995 to 2007. The investigators had very good reason to suspect John's involvement in Rebekah's disappearance, and he decided that it was time to talk. He told detectives that he would exchange information about Rebekah for a life sentence, as well as segregation from the other prisoners. According to John, he drank several beers and watched several adult videos about necrophilia the night before Halloween. He said that necrophilia intrigued him, and he fantasized about committing such acts on Rebekah. After a few more beers, John got the courage to go to Rebekah's trailer, where the door was unlocked, so he let himself in. While Conway slept, John beat Rebekah with a rubber mallet and then placed a cable around her neck and tightened it. He dragged her into the kitchen and removed her clothing, then stuffed her body in a garbage bag and dumped her in a ravine. After this, he drove home and then moved Rebekah's car to the parking lot of the bar to mislead detectives. The police used this information to locate Rebekah's body, and an autopsy was performed. Ligature marks around her neck indicated cause of death, and various abrasions suggested SA, which was either performed shortly before her death or shortly after. In March of 2013, John pled guilty to second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 56 years in prison. Less than a year into his sentence, John took the coward's way out by hanging himself. He was pronounced dead on August 28th of 2013.